By June 15th, 2 months post-stroke and 1 month into actual therapy, I was walking without my walker. My speech was 90% recovered, just a slight hesitation on complex words. My left side strength was returning rapidly. Dr. Morrison called it one of the most remarkable recoveries he'd seen, but I knew the truth. I'd been recovering all along. Daniel and Jessica had just been preventing me from showing it. The house refinancing was voided through court order. Turns out forging your incapacitated father's signature on a $400,000 loan is taken quite seriously by both prosecutors and mortgage companies. The bank had to eat the fraudulent loan, and they were pursuing their own civil action against Daniel for the loss. My brother Thomas remained as guardian until July 1st, when a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed what I'd known all along. My cognitive function was completely intact. The stroke had affected my motor control and speech, but never my mind. I was restored to full legal capacity, with all financial accounts returned to my sole control. The $63,400 Daniel had stolen was being recovered through asset seizure. His BMW, Jessica's Mercedes, their over-leveraged house, all sold to repay what they'd taken. It wouldn't be enough. They'd spent too much, hidden too much in accounts investigators hadn't found yet. But criminal restitution orders meant they'd be paying me back for years. The criminal trial was scheduled for September 15th. Daniel's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. The case was too clean, too documented, too egregious. Elder abuse cases rarely had this much evidence. My tablet recordings alone were devastating. But combined with financial records, medical fraud, and forged documents, it was airtight. Daniel and Jessica were facing 8 to 12 years each in state prison. But before the criminal trial, there was one more confrontation I'd been planning. One more piece of justice I needed. July 28th, the Riverside Rehabilitation Center board meeting. I'd been invited to speak about my experience, to help the board understand how therapy gaps and patient advocacy failures could allow abuse to flourish. Daniel didn't know I'd be there. He'd been invited separately by Dr. Margaret Chen under false pretenses. Mr. Harrison, we'd like your input on our patient outreach protocols. As someone who's been through your father's care situation, your perspective would be valuable for improving our systems. Daniel probably thought it was an opportunity to rehabilitate his image, to play the victimized son whose confused father had made terrible accusations. He showed up in a suit, looking confident, ready to perform. The boardroom was on Riverside's 3rd floor, a professional space with a long conference table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the therapy gym below. 12 board members were present, including Margaret Chen, the medical director, patient advocates, and several senior therapists. I arrived early, took my seat at the head of the table. I was wearing one of my teaching suits, the ones I'd worn during 40 years of lectures. Professional, authoritative, completely recovered. When Daniel walked in at exactly 2 p.m., his confidence shattered the moment he saw me. Not the impaired, struggling man he'd tried to create, but Professor Robert Harrison, fully articulate, completely mobile, absolutely ready to destroy him. "What is this?" Daniel said, looking between me and Margaret. "Please have a seat, Mr. Harrison," Margaret said formally. "We have some matters to discuss regarding your father's care and your role in preventing his recovery." Daniel remained standing. "I don't have to listen to this. My father is confused. He's made false accusations because of stroke-related behavioral changes. Any therapist will tell you that's common. Actually," the medical director said, "post-stroke behavioral changes don't typically include the ability to meticulously document 8 weeks of financial theft, maintain detailed appointment logs, and record hours of audio evidence." "Please sit down." Daniel sat, but his lawyer instincts were kicking in. "I'm not saying anything without legal representation present." "You're not under interrogation, Mr. Harrison. You're attending a board meeting to discuss patient care protocols. Of course, you're free to leave at any time, but the discussion will continue with or without your participation." Margaret activated the room's presentation screen. My evidence spreadsheet appeared, 57 entries of documented abuse. This is what your father compiled while you believed him too impaired to use his tablet. Each entry includes dates, times, and supporting evidence. She clicked through entries. April 3rd, Daniel blocks Riverside's phone number so I can't receive appointment reminders. Screenshot of his phone settings with blocked number highlighted. April 7th, Daniel cancels physical therapy, claiming he has real estate showing. Photo of both cars in driveway all day. Timestamp from home security camera I'd accessed through the tablet. April 10th, Jessica tells me occupational therapy cancelled my sessions due to lack of progress. Recording of phone call with OT office confirming I'd never attended a single session, so progress assessment was impossible. April 15th, mortgage payment of $3,200 withdrawn from my account for a loan that was paid off in 2011. Copy of original mortgage satisfaction document alongside the fraudulent refinancing papers Daniel had forged. The board members were leaning forward, studying each entry with growing alarm. Margaret continued methodically through the evidence. Financial theft totaling $63,400 over 8 weeks. Medication tampering, including unprescribed sedatives mixed with legitimate prescriptions. Forged signatures on a $400,000 cash-out refinance. Systematic cancellation of all therapy appointments during my critical recovery window. Then she played the audio recordings. Daniel's voice filled the boardroom. We just need to run out the clock. After 6 months, his therapy window closes anyway. Once that happens, any recovery becomes exponentially harder. Jessica's voice. What about the home visit from Dr. Morrison? Daniel again. We make sure Dad looks as impaired as possible. Stop the physical exercises you've been doing with him. Cut back his medications a little, just enough to make him more fatigued. When Morrison comes, he sees a man who isn't progressing, who maybe isn't capable of meaningful recovery. The board members' expressions shifted from professional concern to visible disgust. One of the patient advocates, an older woman who'd introduced herself as Linda, actually had tears in her eyes. How long were you planning this? Margaret asked Daniel directly. He said nothing, just stared at the table. Let me help you with the timeline, I said. My voice was clear, strong, completely recovered. The first time Daniel looked up nursing home costs was March 16th, 2 days after my stroke. I found the browser history on the family computer. I stood up, walked around the table without any mobility aid. Each step was steady, controlled, deliberately demonstrating how completely I'd recovered once I received actual care. March 20th, the day I was discharged, Daniel called 4 long-term care facilities to inquire about memory care costs. He told each one his father had severe dementia and would need permanent placement. I reached the presentation screen, advanced to the next slide. Financial projections in Daniel's handwriting, found in his home office. This is his business plan. He calculated that if I was placed in a low-cost memory care facility at $1,800 monthly, and my house was rented for $3,500 monthly, and my pension and Social Security totaling $6,300 monthly were redirected to his control, he'd generate $5,900 of monthly income from my incapacity. The numbers were brutal in their clarity. I wasn't his father. I was a revenue stream. He needed 3 things for this plan to work, I continued. First, prevent my recovery by blocking all therapy during my critical window. Second, maintain or worsen my impairment through medication tampering. Third, get me declared legally incompetent so he could institutionalize me against my will. I turned to face Daniel directly. The papers you wanted me to sign on April 30th weren't routine disability forms. They were pre-authorization for nursing home placement and consent for competency evaluation by a doctor you'd already selected. A doctor who would say whatever you paid him to say. That's not true, Daniel finally spoke. I was trying to prepare for all contingencies. That's responsible caregiving. Is it also responsible caregiving to steal $63,000? I asked, to forge a $400,000 refinance on a paid-off house. To give your father unprescribed sedatives to keep him confused. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The financial stress, the caregiving burden. I understand perfectly, I said coldly. I taught behavioral psychology for 40 years. I understand manipulation, rationalization, and sociopathic self-justification. What I don't understand is how my son became someone who would rather see his father permanently disabled than temporarily inconvenienced. The room was absolutely silent. Margaret spoke carefully. Mr. Harrison, this board's responsibility is patient care and advocacy. What you did to your father represents a catastrophic failure of our system to protect a vulnerable patient. Your systematic interference prevented him from receiving prescribed care during his most critical recovery period. The criminal charges are pending, Linda, the patient advocate added. But this board also has the authority to report professional misconduct. You're a licensed real estate broker, correct? Daniel nodded slowly. Your actions demonstrate moral turpitude and financial exploitation. We're obligated to report to the State Real Estate Commission. Your license will likely be revoked. You can't do that, Daniel said. Real estate is my career. You should have considered that before you decided to steal from your disabled father, Margaret said flatly. The medical director pulled out a formal document. The board is also issuing a permanent ban on your presence at any Riverside facility. You're prohibited from attending appointments, picking up patients, or representing yourself as a family caregiver for anyone receiving services here. Furthermore, Margaret continued, we're implementing new protocols directly because of your case. Mandatory welfare checks for any patient who misses 3 consecutive appointments. Direct patient contact for all cancellations, not just family proxy calls. And enhanced screening for signs of caregiver abuse or financial exploitation. I returned to my seat. Daniel, do you know what the worst part is? He looked at me for the first time since I'd started presenting. Behind the anger and fear, I saw something else. Shame, maybe, or just the calculation of a trapped rat. The worst part is that if you'd just asked for help, I would have given it. You were struggling financially? I would have helped. You needed time to get your real estate career established. I would have supported you, but you didn't want help. You wanted control. You wanted me erased, diminished, reduced to a source of income who couldn't interfere with your plans. Dad, I raised you, I said, and for the first time, emotion cracked through my controlled presentation. Your mother and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. We paid for your education, supported you through 2 career changes, co-signed your first house because your credit wasn't good enough. And the moment I needed help, the moment I was vulnerable, you saw an opportunity to cash in. It wasn't like that. Then how was it, Daniel? Explain to me how stealing $63,000 from your disabled father was anything other than premeditated financial exploitation. He had no answer. Just sat there, trapped by his own recorded words, his own forged documents, his own calculated cruelty. Margaret looked at the rest of the board. Are there any questions for Mr. Harrison? I have one, said Dr. James Peterson, the board's neurologist. Robert, when did you realize you were recovering despite their interference rather than because of your impairment? About 3 weeks in, I said. When I stopped taking the medications they were giving me and suddenly felt clearer. That's when I understood this wasn't accidental neglect. It was deliberate sabotage. And the tablet documentation, old habits from 40 years of teaching, document everything. Evidence-based conclusions. I knew that eventually I'd need to prove what was happening, and I knew my word alone wouldn't be enough given my impaired speech. So I collected evidence until I could present an irrefutable case. Remarkable, Dr. Peterson said. Both your recovery and your strategic thinking during a period when most patients would be focused solely on basic survival. I had motivation, I said simply. I knew if I didn't fight back, I'd spend the rest of my life in a memory care facility, chemically sedated, legally incompetent, while my son stole everything my wife and I built over 40 years of marriage. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes. Board members asked detailed questions about gaps in their patient protection protocols, about warning signs they should have caught, about system failures that allowed my case to progress as far as it did, Daniel sat through it all in silence. His lawyer had probably told him not to say anything that could be used against him in criminal trial. But his presence served a purpose. He heard every board member express disgust at his actions, heard them implement new policies specifically to prevent future cases like mine, heard them discuss reporting him to licensing boards and professional organizations. By the time the meeting concluded at 5:30, Daniel looked like he'd aged 10 years. As people gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Margaret approached me. "Robert, what you did was extraordinary. The documentation, the strategic thinking, the patience to collect evidence while appearing impaired. That took remarkable discipline. I had a good teacher," I said. "My wife, Margaret, the one Daniel's wife is named after, ironically. She taught me that justice requires evidence, not just accusations. That if you're going to make a stand, you'd better have the documentation to back it up." "Your wife would be proud," Margaret said. "I think she'd be heartbroken," I corrected. She loved Daniel, thought he was going to be remarkable. Seeing what he became, what he was willing to do, that would have destroyed her. I'm almost glad she didn't live to see this. Daniel was gathering his things slowly, clearly hoping everyone would leave before he had to walk out. I let most of the board members exit, then approached him one final time. "Daniel?" He looked up, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to sit at our kitchen table doing homework, who used to ask me to explain psychology concepts, who used to say he wanted to be like his dad when he grew up. "The criminal trial is September 15th, I said quietly. "Your attorney is probably telling you to fight the charges, claim I'm confused, claim this is all a misunderstanding. Don't do that. What else am I supposed to do? Accept responsibility, plead guilty, show the judge genuine remorse. It's your only chance at a reduced sentence. Why would you help me now?" "I'm not helping you. I'm helping the man you used to be before greed made you someone I don't recognize. That man deserves a chance at redemption. The person you've become deserves everything that's coming." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "One more thing. The house, my house, the one you tried to steal through fraudulent refinancing, I'm leaving it to the Riverside Rehabilitation Center in my will. They're going to create a patient advocacy program specifically focused on protecting vulnerable adults from caregiver abuse. It'll be called the Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program, after your mother. So I get nothing," Daniel said bitterly. "You get exactly what you tried to give me, the chance to start over with nothing, dependent on others' kindness, hoping someone will help you rebuild your life." His face crumpled. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw genuine emotion from him. Not calculated concern, not practiced care, but real devastation at understanding what he'd destroyed. "Dad, I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry. I know you are. Sorry you got caught. Sorry there are consequences. But I don't know if you're sorry for what you actually did. For looking at your disabled father and seeing a revenue stream instead of a person who needed help." I left him sitting there in that empty boardroom, alone with the weight of his choices. September 15th arrived with surprising speed. The criminal trial was held in County Superior Court, Judge Patricia Williamson presiding. The prosecution had offered Daniel and Jessica a final plea deal. Plead guilty to all charges, except 5 years in state prison with possibility of parole after 3. Pay full restitution of $63,400 plus additional damages. The alternative was going to trial, where they faced 8 to 12 years if convicted on all counts. I sat in the gallery with Thomas and Margaret Chen, watching Daniel and Jessica confer with their attorneys. They'd been separated since arrest, each released on bail with strict no-contact orders. Jessica looked diminished, her designer clothes replaced by a simple dress that probably came from Target. Daniel wore a suit, but it hung on him differently. He'd lost weight, looked older, looked defeated. When Judge Williamson called the court to order, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defendants have accepted the plea agreement. They're prepared to enter guilty pleas to all charges. Mr. Harrison, Miss Harrison, please stand." They stood together, not looking at each other. "You understand that by pleading guilty, You're waiving your right to trial and accepting responsibility for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Forgery, identity theft, medical fraud, and conspiracy? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel said. Jessica just nodded. I need a verbal response, Ms. Harrison. Yes, Your Honor. Before I accept these pleas, I want to hear from the victim. Mr. Robert Harrison, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to see how completely I'd recovered, how absolutely their plan had failed. Your Honor, Daniel is my only child. His mother and I dedicated our lives to giving him opportunities, education, support. We thought we were raising someone who understood the value of family, of loyalty, of basic human decency. I looked directly at Daniel. 18 months ago, my wife died of cancer. Daniel was there at the funeral, helping me grieve, telling me I'd never be alone because family takes care of family. 6 weeks later, I had a stroke. And in that moment of vulnerability, Daniel saw opportunity instead of obligation. He systematically prevented my recovery, stole my money, tampered with my medications, and planned to have me institutionalized so he could profit from my disability. If I hadn't managed to document his actions, if I hadn't reached out for help, I would be in a locked memory care facility right now, legally incompetent, chemically sedated. While Daniel lived off my income and rented my house, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Your Honor, I support the plea agreement because 5 years is enough time for Daniel to understand what he destroyed. Not just financially, though the theft was significant, but the destruction of our relationship, of trust, of the father-son bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. I hope that in those 5 years he finds genuine remorse, not for getting caught, but for his actions. I hope he becomes someone his mother would recognize again. Because right now, I don't know who that man is. Judge Williamson listened carefully, then addressed Daniel directly. Mr. Harrison, is there anything you'd like to say before I accept your plea? Daniel stood silent for a long moment. His attorney whispered something urgent, probably telling him to keep it brief, express remorse. Don't say anything that could complicate sentencing. But Daniel ignored him. Dad, I don't know how to explain what I became. The financial pressure, the feeling of failure, seeing you with everything paid off while I was drowning in debt. It twisted something in me, made me think I deserved what you had, that you wouldn't need it much longer anyway, that I was just accelerating the inevitable. His voice broke. But you're right. Mom would be ashamed of what I did. I'm ashamed of what I did. I looked at my own father and saw a problem to solve instead of a person who needed help. There's no excuse for that. No justification. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that somewhere down the line, maybe you'll believe that this person standing here, the one who understands what he destroyed, is who I really am. And the person who hurt you was someone I became when I lost sight of everything you and Mom taught me. Judge Williamson studied him for a moment. Mr. Harrison, I presided over hundreds of elder abuse cases. Very few defendants expressed genuine remorse. Most minimize their actions, blame the victim, claim misunderstanding. Your statement suggests you may actually understand the gravity of what you did. I do, Your Honor. Then I'm accepting your guilty plea and the negotiated sentence. 5 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 3 years if you complete rehabilitative programming. Full restitution of $63,400 plus an additional $30,000 for medical costs, legal fees, and damages. You're also permanently prohibited from serving as power of attorney, guardian, or medical representative for any vulnerable adult. She turned to Jessica. Ms. Harrison, the same terms apply to you. Additionally, both of you are prohibited from any contact with Robert Harrison for 10 years following your release from incarceration. Bailiff, please remand the defendants to custody. Daniel and Jessica were led away in handcuffs. Daniel looked back once, caught my eyes. I didn't look away, didn't show anger or satisfaction. Just watched my son disappear through the courtroom doors, heading to prison for crimes against his own father. Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. You okay? I don't know. I said honestly. I got justice. I proved what he did. But I'm not sure if I feel victory or just sadness that it came to this. Both can be true, Margaret Chen said. You protected yourself and created systems to protect others. That matters, even if the personal cost was high. We left the courthouse together. Outside, local news crews were covering the case. Elder abuse prosecutions were rare enough that a son stealing from his stroke-disabled father made headlines. I gave a brief statement, not about Daniel specifically, but about the importance of protecting vulnerable adults, of questioning when caregiving looks more like control, of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. That evening, I sat in my study, the same room where I'd been working when the stroke hit 6 months earlier. The house was quiet, mine again, free of people who saw me as a resource to exploit. On my desk was a letter from Riverside Rehabilitation Center. They'd officially accepted my donation of the house to establish the Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program. After my death, the house would be sold and proceeds used to fund patient advocacy, caregiver screening, and rapid intervention for suspected abuse cases. I'd also established a scholarship at State University in my late wife's name, funding psychology students who wanted to specialize in elder care and abuse prevention. The $63,000 Daniel was paying back in restitution would fund the first 3 years of scholarships. Something good from something terrible. My recovery was nearly complete. Speech fully restored, mobility at 95%, cognitive function sharp as ever. I'd returned to teaching part-time at the university, focusing on ethics in psychology and family systems. My students didn't know their professor had recently been the victim of the kind of abuse we discussed in theoretical terms. But I brought a perspective to those lectures that no textbook could provide. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Daniel. Prison mail, carefully screened, his handwriting still familiar despite everything. Dad, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness or even acknowledgement. But my therapist here says I need to write this for myself, to articulate what I understand now that I couldn't see before. I destroyed our relationship for money I didn't even get to keep. I treated you like you were already dead, like your life after the stroke didn't matter because it was inconvenient to me. I stole from you, drugged you, tried to bury you in an institution so I could live comfortably off your suffering. The worst part is remembering all the times you helped me. Co-signing my first house when my credit was bad. Lending me money for Mom's medical bills when I was broke. Being there every time I failed at something. Never judging, just supporting. And I repaid all of that by seeing your stroke as my opportunity. I have 3 years minimum before parole eligibility. I'm using that time to try to become someone you'd recognize again. Someone Mom would recognize. I'm taking every class they offer. Psychology, ethics, addiction counseling. I'm working in the prison's elder care assistance program, helping other inmates write letters to family, file paperwork, understand their rights. I don't know if I'll ever be able to face you again. Don't know if I deserve to. But I wanted you to know that every day I think about what I did. And every day I try to be less like the person who did it. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. I didn't respond. Wasn't ready to, might never be ready. But I kept it, because maybe someday I'd want to remember that even people who do terrible things can try to change. December 22nd, 9 months after my stroke, I stood in the Riverside Rehabilitation Center's new conference room. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program was being officially launched with a ceremony and press conference. The conference room was full. Medical professionals, social workers, patient advocates, journalists, and families who'd experienced elder abuse. Margaret Chen stood at the podium explaining the program's mission. The Margaret Harrison program represents a fundamental shift in how we approach vulnerable adult care. We're implementing mandatory welfare checks, enhanced caregiver screening, direct patient communication protocols, and rapid intervention procedures for suspected abuse. This program exists because one man had the courage and strategic thinking to document his own abuse while appearing helpless. Because he understood that evidence matters more than accusations, and because he chose to turn his trauma into protection for others. She invited me to speak. I walked to the podium without assistance, stood before the assembled crowd as a living testament to what recovery looks like when patients actually receive care. 6 months ago, I couldn't walk without support, couldn't speak clearly, couldn't even attend a single therapy appointment because my own son prevented it. Today, I'm here to tell you that stroke recovery is possible, but only if we protect patients from those who would exploit their vulnerability. This program is named for my late wife, Margaret, because she taught me that when you see injustice, you document it, you fight it, and you create systems to prevent it from happening to others. She would have been proud of what we're building here. To every family member caring for an elderly or disabled loved one, your role is sacred. You hold someone's life, dignity, and future in your hands. Honor that responsibility. To every vulnerable adult worried about your own care situation, speak up. Find someone you trust. Document everything. Your voice matters, even when others try to silence it. And to anyone tempted to exploit a vulnerable person for financial gain, understand that you're not just stealing money. You're stealing someone's recovery, their dignity, their right to heal. And increasingly, systems are in place to catch you and hold you accountable. The program launched with 12 new staff positions, a 24-hour crisis hotline, and partnerships with law enforcement for rapid intervention. In the first month, they prevented 3 cases of caregiver abuse, conducted 17 wellness checks, and provided advocacy support for 9 families navigating complex care situations. March 14th, 1 year after my stroke, I received a call from the State Real Estate Commission. Daniel's broker license had been formally revoked. He wouldn't be able to work in real estate after his release from prison. The commission representative asked if I wanted to provide input on the decision. The revocation stands on its own merits, I said. Daniel violated the trust essential to professional licensing, but I hope that when he's released, he finds work helping people instead of exploiting them. He has potential for good if he chooses to pursue it. 6 months later, I received another letter from Daniel. Shorter this time, less self-focused. Dad, I completed the prison's peer counseling certification. I'm working with inmates who've committed financial crimes, helping them understand the harm they caused and develop restitution plans. It's not redemption, but it's something. The parole board review is in 8 months. I don't know if I'm ready for release, but I'm trying to be someone who deserves a second chance. Not a second chance with you. I understand that's probably gone forever. But a second chance to contribute something positive to the world. Thank you for creating the Elder Protection Program. I heard about it from my caseworker. Mom would be proud of that. I hope someday I can be involved in similar work, making amends by preventing others from making my mistakes. I kept this letter too, filed with the first one. Still didn't respond, but I noticed the shift in his language. Less about what he'd lost, more about what he could give. Maybe prison was actually reaching him, or maybe he was just getting better at saying what people wanted to hear. Time would tell. Today I'm 70 years old, fully recovered from my stroke, teaching full-time again at State University. My behavioral psychology courses now include extensive modules on elder abuse, caregiver manipulation, and systemic protections for vulnerable adults. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program has expanded to 14 rehabilitation facilities across 3 states. In 2 years, they've intervened in 47 cases of suspected abuse, prevented an estimated $2.3 million in financial exploitation, and provided advocacy support for hundreds of families. Thomas visits regularly from Columbus. Margaret Chen and I serve together on the program's advisory board. My former students, now professionals in psychology, social work, and patient advocacy, tell me the program has changed how they approach vulnerable adult cases. I live in my house alone but not lonely. I have friends, professional commitments, students who challenge me, causes that matter. The space that Daniel occupied is still empty, still painful, but no longer consuming. Jessica was released early on good behavior after serving 3 years. She moved to another state, changed her name, started over completely. I heard through legal channels that she's working in retail, living paycheck to paycheck, slowly paying back her portion of the restitution. Daniel comes up for parole next month, 3 years into his 5-year sentence. The parole board contacted me, asking if I want to provide input or attend the hearing. I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to see who he's become, whether the remorse in his letters is genuine or performance. Part of me wants to leave that chapter closed. Let him rebuild his life without my involvement, but I keep thinking about something my wife Margaret used to say. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about creating the conditions for people to become better than their worst actions. Daniel committed terrible crimes against me, deserved every consequence he received. But if he's genuinely changed, if he's actually become someone who could prevent others from making his mistakes, does he deserve a chance to prove it? I don't know the answer yet, but I have 3 weeks before the parole hearing to decide. What I do know is this: I survived. Not just the stroke, but the betrayal, the abuse, the systematic attempt to erase my personhood. I documented everything, fought strategically, obtained justice, and created systems to protect others. That matters more than whether I eventually forgive my son. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program will outlive me, will protect vulnerable adults for generations. The scholarships will fund students who'll become advocates and caregivers who actually care. My story, as painful as it is, has become a teaching tool for recognizing and preventing elder abuse. Sometimes the best revenge isn't personal. It's creating change that prevents others from experiencing what you survived. It's turning your trauma into protection for people you'll never meet. Daniel tried to bury me in a memory care facility, steal my life's work, and profit from my suffering. Instead, I recovered completely, exposed his crimes, and built a legacy of protection and advocacy. He's in prison. I'm free, healthy, and using my voice to protect others. In the end, that's the justice that matters most. 3 weeks later, I sat in the parole board hearing room, facing the 5-member panel and my son for the first time in 3 years. Daniel looked different, thinner, grayer, older than 38, but something in his eyes had changed too. Less calculation, more exhaustion. Or maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Mr. Robert Harrison, thank you for attending, the board chair said. We understand this is difficult given your relationship to the petitioner. I'm here because I want to understand if Daniel Harrison has actually changed or if he's simply learned to better mimic remorse, I said clearly. The board member blinked at my directness, but nodded. That's precisely what we're trying to determine. They asked Daniel standard questions. What had he learned? How had he changed? What were his plans after release? His answers were thoughtful, specific, detailed. He talked about the peer counseling program, about helping other inmates understand the harm financial crimes cause, about his plans to work in addiction counseling or social services. I can never practice real estate again, Daniel said. My license is permanently revoked. But I've discovered I'm good at helping people navigate bureaucracy, understand their rights, access services. In here, I've helped 63 inmates file for disability benefits they didn't know they qualified for. Helped 41 reconnect with family members. Taught financial literacy classes to people who made the same mistakes I did. The work doesn't erase what I did to my father. Nothing can, but it gives me purpose beyond my own self-interest. And maybe that's what I was missing before. A reason to exist that wasn't just about my comfort, my success, my financial security. The board chair turned to me. Mr. Harrison, what's your position on the petitioner's parole? I looked at Daniel for a long moment, saw the son who'd tried to destroy me, saw the inmate who might have actually learned something, saw the uncertain future of a man who'd blown up his entire life through greed and cruelty. I don't know if Daniel's change is genuine, I said finally. I may never know for certain, but I know he's served his time according to the plea agreement. I know he's completed every program available to him. And I know that keeping him incarcerated longer serves punishment, not rehabilitation. My position is this: grant him parole with strict conditions. Mandatory therapy, Continued restitution payments, regular check-ins with his parole officer, employment in social services or victim advocacy, not in any position handling others' finances, and absolutely no contact with me unless I initiate it. I stood up, preparing to leave. Daniel destroyed our relationship. That can't be fixed by good behavior in prison. But if he's genuinely committed to preventing others from making his mistakes, then he should have the chance to prove it. Not for his sake, for the sake of people he might help. The board granted parole with every condition I'd suggested, plus a few additional ones. Daniel would be released in 30 days, required to find approved housing and employment before his release date. As I walked out of the hearing room, Daniel called after me. "Dad." I stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I've changed, for not blocking my parole, for the program you created in Mom's name, for everything." "Don't thank me," I said. "Prove it. Spend the rest of your life preventing what you did to me from happening to someone else. That's the only thanks I want." I walked away out of the prison, back to my life. The life he'd tried to steal and I'd fought to reclaim. Today, 2 years after Daniel's release, I can report this. He kept his word. He works at a non-profit providing advocacy services for disabled adults. He's paid back $41,000 of the $63,000 he owes. He volunteers at Riverside's Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program, teaching families how to recognize financial exploitation. We don't have a relationship. Maybe we never will. But from a distance, I watch him try to become someone his mother would recognize. Someone who helps instead of hurts. Someone who protects instead of exploits. It's not redemption. Redemption would require facing me, apologizing directly, rebuilding trust that may be permanently shattered. But it's something. It's a son who destroyed his father, trying to prevent other sons from making the same choice. It's a criminal trying to balance the scales, not through words, but through actions that protect the vulnerable, and maybe that's enough. Not for our relationship, but for the world to be slightly better than if he'd learned nothing. My stroke recovery is complete. I teach full courses now, mentor graduate students, serve on the advisory board for 3 elder protection organizations. The house Daniel tried to steal through fraud will become a training center for patient advocates after my death, fully funded and operational in perpetuity through the foundation I established. Margaret would be proud of what came from the trauma. She always said that suffering either destroys you or transforms you into someone who prevents others from suffering the same way. I chose transformation. Daniel, in his own complicated way, seems to be choosing it too. Last month I received a letter from a woman named Catherine Morrison. Her father had suffered a stroke, and her brother had started cancelling his therapy appointments, isolating him from family, controlling his finances. She'd recognized the pattern from a presentation I'd given at a medical conference. "I documented everything like you said," she wrote. "Kept records, recorded conversations, gathered evidence. When I confronted my brother with the documentation and threatened to involve adult protective services, he broke down. Admitted he was drowning financially and saw our dad as a solution. But your presentation showed him what that path leads to. Prison, destroyed relationships, permanent consequences. Because of your story, my brother got help instead of getting worse. Dad is in therapy now, recovering well. Our family's in counseling, dealing with the financial pressures that led my brother to consider something so terrible. We're healing instead of destroying each other. I'm writing to thank you. Your willingness to share your trauma publicly saved my family from experiencing the same devastation. My father will never know how close he came to having his recovery sabotaged by his own son. And my brother will never have to live with having done to his father what Daniel Harrison did to you. I read that letter 3 times, then filed it with 47 others like it. Families who'd recognized warning signs. Patients who'd advocated for themselves. Healthcare workers who'd intervened in suspected abuse. All because I documented my abuse, fought back strategically, and then shared my story to protect others. That's the legacy that matters. Not whether Daniel and I ever reconcile. Not whether he's truly changed or just performing change, but whether the system I helped build prevents others from experiencing what I survived. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program has now expanded to 73 facilities across 11 states. They've prevented 426 cases of elder abuse, recovered over $18 million in stolen funds, provided advocacy for thousands of vulnerable adults who might otherwise have been silenced by those claiming to care for them. Every one of those people is someone who didn't have to experience what I did. Someone whose recovery wasn't sabotaged. Someone whose family didn't betray them in their most vulnerable moment. Someone who got the care they deserved instead of exploitation disguised as caregiving. I'm 72 years old now. 2 years past my stroke, I run 3 miles every morning. Teach 4 classes per semester. Published a book on elder abuse prevention that's used in medical schools and social work programs nationwide. My life is full, purposeful, meaningful. Daniel is 39, working his advocacy job, paying his restitution, volunteering at the program named for his mother. We're not father and son anymore, not in any traditional sense. But we're both, in our separate ways, working to prevent the thing he did from happening to others. Last week, I spoke at a conference on vulnerable adult protection. After my presentation, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, uncertain. Professor Harrison, I'm Eric Chen, Margaret Chen's nephew. She talks about you all the time, about what you survived, about the program you built. I smiled. Margaret Chen had been instrumental in my rescue and recovery. Her family connections to my work weren't surprising. Your aunt is remarkable, I said. I wouldn't have survived without her intervention. She says the same about you, that your strategic thinking and documentation saved your life. He hesitated. I'm in law school now, focusing on elder law and abuse prevention. I want to prosecute cases like yours, protect people who can't protect themselves. That's excellent work, Eric. Important work. I just wanted you to know that your story matters, that sharing what happened to you is creating a generation of advocates who understand what's at stake. He handed me his card. When I graduate, if the Margaret Harrison program ever needs legal support, I'd be honored to help. I took the card, feeling the weight of legacy in that small gesture. One vulnerable adult's survival story, becoming training material, becoming inspiration, becoming the catalyst for young people choosing careers in protection and advocacy. That night, I sat in my study and wrote something I'd been avoiding for 2 years. A letter to Daniel. Daniel, I'm writing this not because we have a relationship to repair, but because you deserve to know the impact of what happened between us. You tried to destroy me for $63,000 and the equity in a house. You failed. I recovered, documented everything, obtained justice, and built systems to protect others from experiencing what you put me through. But here's what you couldn't destroy: my capacity to turn trauma into purpose. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program has prevented over 400 cases of abuse. The scholarships in your mother's name have funded 32 students pursuing careers in elder advocacy. My book is required reading in 67 universities. The conference presentations I give have trained thousands of medical professionals to recognize and intervene in situations like mine. You tried to bury me in a memory care facility. Instead, I've spent the last 2 years making sure families understand how to protect their vulnerable members from people like the person you became. Every case prevented is a small victory over what you did. Every patient protected is proof that your betrayal didn't win. I hear you're doing good work now. Advocacy for disabled adults, volunteering at Mom's program, paying back what you stole. I don't know if your change is genuine, and honestly, I may never care enough to find out. Our relationship died when you chose theft over care, exploitation over compassion. But if your work prevents even one son from looking at his vulnerable father and seeing a revenue stream instead of a person, then something good came from something terrible. That's not redemption for what you did to me. That's you trying to balance a scale that may never be balanced. I'm not writing this for reconciliation. I'm writing it so you understand that you didn't break me. You tried, systematically and deliberately. But I was stronger than you calculated, smarter than you assumed, more determined than you anticipated. The stroke weakened my body temporarily. Your betrayal could have destroyed my spirit permanently. It did neither. I'm healthier now than before the stroke, more purposeful than I've been in years, more committed to work that matters. And you're a convicted felon with a permanently revoked license, working to pay back money you never should have taken, trying to rebuild a life you destroyed through greed. We both know who won this confrontation. I hope you continue your advocacy work. I hope you prevent others from making your choices. I hope you become someone your mother would have recognized. Not for my sake, but for the sake of people you might help. But understand this clearly. I don't forgive you. I don't welcome contact. I don't want updates on your life or efforts at reconciliation. What I want is for you to spend every remaining day proving that the person who betrayed his stroke-disabled father was an aberration, not your true character. Prove it through actions, not words. Through lives protected, not apologies offered. Through becoming someone who prevents harm instead of causing it. That's the only relationship we have now. Parallel paths toward preventing elder abuse. Mine through systems and advocacy. Yours through personal redemption and service. We'll never walk those paths together, but maybe we're both walking them toward the same goal. Your mother loved you until her last breath. She would have been destroyed by what you did, but she also would have believed in your capacity to change. I don't have her faith. I have evidence, data, outcomes. When the evidence shows you've genuinely changed, I'll acknowledge it. Until then, keep working. I sealed the letter, addressed it to his parole officer, with instructions to forward it to Daniel. I didn't want his response, didn't want to open a dialogue. Just wanted him to understand the full scope of what his betrayal had created, not just his own destruction, but my transformation. Not just his prison sentence, but my legacy of protection. Not just his loss, but hundreds of vulnerable adults who would be protected because I'd survived and shared my story. 2 weeks later, I received a response. Not from Daniel directly, but from his parole officer, Professor Harrison. I'm writing to confirm that Daniel received your letter. He read it in my presence during our weekly check-in. His response was silence for several minutes. Then a single sentence. He's right about everything. He asked me to convey that he's not seeking contact or reconciliation, but wanted you to know the letter will be kept as a reminder of why his current work matters. He also asked me to provide you with data from his advocacy organization. Attached were statistics. In 2 years, Daniel's nonprofit had provided advocacy services to 347 disabled adults, prevented 83 cases of financial exploitation, recovered $1.2 million in stolen funds, provided training to 62 caregiver organizations on recognizing and preventing abuse, numbers that meant nothing in terms of our relationship, but everything in terms of impact. Daniel was doing the work. Whether for genuine redemption or skilled performance, vulnerable adults were being protected. That's all I'd asked for. Not reconciliation, but results. Not apology, but action. Not words about change, but measurable outcomes proving it. I filed the letter with my growing collection of correspondence about the elder protection work. Daniel's data alongside letters from families we'd helped, from students we'd trained, from patients we'd protected. My trauma had become a movement. Daniel's crime had become a cautionary tale that prevented others from following his path. And somewhere in the intersection of those two realities, vulnerable adults were safer. That's the justice I'd fought for. Not revenge, though I'd had that too. Not punishment, though consequences had been severe. But systemic change that would outlive both of us. Protection that would extend to people we'd never meet, in situations we'd never know about, because the work we'd separately built would continue long after we were gone. Today, on the 4th anniversary of my stroke, I stood in Riverside Rehabilitation Center's Margaret Harrison conference room, surrounded by 200 healthcare professionals, patient advocates, and family members who'd survived elder abuse. 4 years ago, I began. I couldn't speak clearly, couldn't walk without support, and was being systematically abused by my own son. I survived because I documented everything, because one ally believed me, and because I refused to accept the future my abuser had planned for me. Today, the Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program operates in 73 facilities. We've prevented over 400 cases of abuse, recovered millions in stolen funds, trained thousands of professionals, published research that's changing how we approach vulnerable adult protection. But numbers don't capture what this work really means. It means patients who get the therapy they need instead of having it cancelled by greedy caregivers. It means families who intervene early instead of discovering abuse too late. It means vulnerable adults who maintain their dignity, their autonomy, their right to recover from illness or injury without being exploited. My son tried to destroy me for financial gain. He failed, faced consequences, and by all reports is now working to prevent others from making his choices. Our relationship is gone, probably forever. But the systems we've separately built protect people neither of us will ever meet. That's the legacy that matters. Not personal reconciliation, but public protection. Not whether families heal, but whether abuse is prevented. Not forgiveness, but results that can be measured in lives protected and dignity preserved. I looked around the room at faces representing every aspect of elder protection work. Medical professionals who'd learned to recognize warning signs, social workers who'd intervened in suspected abuse, attorneys who'd prosecuted financial exploitation, families who'd protected their vulnerable members. 4 years ago, I was a victim. Today, I'm an advocate. The difference is documentation, strategy, allies, and the determination to turn trauma into systemic change. Every person in this room has the power to protect someone. Use it, document everything, believe victims, intervene early. Build systems that prevent abuse instead of just responding to it. And remember that vulnerability isn't weakness. Recovery isn't automatic. Protection isn't optional. Every vulnerable adult deserves care that actually cares, not exploitation disguised as caregiving. The applause was sustained, genuine, but what mattered more were the conversations afterward. The medical resident asking about documentation protocols. The social worker sharing a suspected abuse case and getting immediate guidance on intervention. The daughter confessing her brother seemed to be isolating their father and getting connected to resources before the situation escalated. Prevention happening in real time. Protection being implemented. The work Margaret had believed in when she rescued me, multiplied across hundreds of conversations and connections. That evening, I returned to my study and pulled out a box I'd been filling for 4 years. Evidence from my own case, now archived for research purposes. Documentation of every cancelled appointment, every stolen dollar, every manipulated medication, every recorded conversation where Daniel had discussed running out the clock on my recovery. The evidence that had saved my life. The documentation that had built these protection systems. The proof that even in your most vulnerable moment, if you stay strategic and gather evidence, justice is possible. I added the day's conference materials to the box. Another layer of protection built on the foundation of my survival. Another generation of advocates trained to recognize what I'd experienced and intervene before it escalated. The box would eventually go to the university archives, available for researchers studying elder abuse prevention, for students learning about vulnerable adult protection, for professionals developing intervention protocols. My trauma permanently preserved as a teaching tool. Daniel's crime immortalized as a cautionary tale. Our destroyed relationship transformed into systems that would protect thousands. That's the revenge that matters most. Not personal satisfaction, though I'd had that. Not seeing your abuser punished, though consequences had been severe. But turning your suffering into protection for others. Making sure your trauma creates systemic change that prevents the next victim from experiencing what you survived. 4 years after my stroke, I'm healthier, more purposeful, more impactful than ever. Daniel is rebuilding from nothing, working to prove his change is genuine. We'll never be father and son again, but we're both committed to making sure what happened between us doesn't happen to others. That's not reconciliation. That's not forgiveness. That's not healing. But it's something. It's two people, permanently scarred by betrayal and consequences, separately working toward a world with less elder abuse. And in the end, that's the only justice that really matters. Not what happens to the individuals involved, but whether the systems change, whether the next vulnerable adult is protected, whether the next family intervenes before abuse escalates, whether the next caregiver chooses compassion over exploitation because they understand the consequences of doing otherwise. My son tried to bury me in a memory care facility and steal everything my wife and I built. Instead, I recovered completely, exposed his crimes, built protection systems that will outlive us both, and spent 4 years making sure other families don't experience our tragedy. He's in the same field now, working to prevent what he once perpetrated. Whether that's redemption or strategy, I may never know. But vulnerable adults are safer because of the work we've both done, separately and permanently estranged. That's the legacy I'll leave. Not a reconciled family, but a protected population. Not forgiveness, but systems that prevent the need for it. Not personal healing, but public protection that extends far beyond my individual story. My stroke nearly destroyed me. My son's betrayal could have finished the job. Instead, both became the foundation for work that matters more than any individual relationship. The Margaret Harrison Elder Protection Program will operate long after I'm gone. The scholarships will fund advocates for generations. The book will train professionals who will protect thousands. The conference presentations will create networks of protection that span the country. And somewhere in that work, my son participates. Not as my son anymore, but as another worker in the field of elder protection. We'll never share a holiday again, never have a personal conversation, never rebuild what his greed destroyed. But we'll both spend the rest of our lives making sure other families don't experience what ours did. That's not a relationship. That's not reconciliation. That's just two people, permanently damaged by betrayal, trying to prevent the damage from spreading. And honestly, that's enough. It has to be, because justice isn't about personal satisfaction. It's about systemic change. It's about the 400 cases prevented, the millions recovered, the thousands trained, the vulnerable adults protected. My son tried to destroy me. I survived, documented everything, and built systems that will protect people for generations. His face in that boardroom 4 years ago, when he realized his victim had recovered and documented everything, when he understood he'd lost completely, that was satisfying, but the real victory is quieter. It's the woman who recognized her brother's abuse before it escalated, the doctor who caught financial exploitation early, the patient who advocated for their own care, the family who intervened based on training I provided. Those are the moments that matter. Those are the victories that count. And 4 years after my stroke, sitting in my study on a quiet evening, reviewing the impact data from programs built on my survival, I can finally say something I couldn't say when this nightmare began. I won. Completely, decisively, permanently. Not because my son went to prison, though he did. Not because I recovered fully, though I did. Not because I got revenge, though that happened too, but because I transformed trauma into protection, turned betrayal into systemic change, made sure my suffering prevented thousands of others from experiencing the same. That's the justice that matters most. That's the victory worth fighting for. That's the legacy I'll leave. My son tried to bury me. Instead, I built a monument to survival, protection, and the refusal to let evil people win. And 4 years later, that monument stands, protecting the vulnerable, training advocates, preventing abuse. That's how you really win. Not through revenge, but through results that outlive everyone involved.